Is it? I'm going to hit record on the video. I record my audio separate, so if you guys don't have any more questions, I can get going. Are you good? And I usually go around 1 hour, but I mean, I also don't stop if it's really important to continue. So
Okay.
we're good. Okay.
That's good.
All right. So if you're ready, in 3, 2, 1. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Sandy K Nutrition, Health and Lifestyle Queen. Today with me, I have two guests. I have Brett Hawes, and he is a certified functional medicine practitioner and holistic nutritionist with 18 years of clinical experience. In addition to running his own clinical practice, he also teaches at the Institute of Holistic Nutrition and hosts health masterclasses for health professionals and the general public. Brett is well known as an activist and is a vocal opponent of medical mandates. In 2007-2008, he organized the largest health freedom rally at the time in opposition to Bill C-51 and 52. Guys, we're going to get into all of this, so keep listening. He has also interviewed leading experts on GMO vaccine risk awareness, health sovereignty, technocracy, and other controversial topics on his top-ranking podcast, Holistic Health Masterclass. He is eager to continue his work with the NHPPA and preserve Canadians' right to bodily autonomy and access to natural health care. My second guest is Melody Byblow, and she is a registered holistic nutritionist and certified master workplace wellness consultant in Saskatoon. After experiencing firsthand the limitations of conventional healthcare in Canada, me too, Melody, by the way, she pursued holistic health education, which helped her recover from debilitating pain, fatigue, and other issues. She now uses employee wellness programs, executive wellness coaching, public speaking, and holistic health and nutrition coaching to share practical ways to adopt a natural health rights and freedom of choice to access quality natural health products and natural health practitioners. Now, everyone, I know these bios are a little bit long, but it's important that you know who is speaking today. Both are representatives of the NHPPA, Natural Health Products Protection Association. And it's a really important topic, not just for Canadians, but for everyone to listen to, because we're going to discuss the state of natural health products in Canada and how this reflects worldwide. So welcome, Brett and Melody.
Hey, Sandy, thanks. Yeah, thank you.
I'm very, very happy to have you both here because I have been following along all this while, and this is not new stuff. I mean, Brett, I did give you both a pretty good introduction there, but of course I'm gonna have to ask, what's your background? Why so passionate about this industry?
Well, it's a long story, so I won't give you the full story. But for me, I sort of got into the whole space through other avenues, right? So I've been into the shamanic side of things a lot more, and I traveled all over the world. I've spent a lot of time with indigenous people. And so for me, that was my sort of vehicle to get into the nutrition side of things, and then later the functional medicine side of things. But I think, as we were discussing before we hit the record button, like there's a real big paradigm shift that's happening in the healthcare space right now. And I think it ties in a lot with what we're seeing out there, because more and more people are looking to natural medicine, alternative healthcare, and what have you to support their health, because they realize the shortcomings of the medical system. As you've both said, you've personally experienced that. And I think that, modern medicine has its time and place. If you get hit by a bus or you have an injury or a pregnancy or something like that, it's a great place to be. But unfortunately, what we're seeing now is that most people are suffering and dying from lifestyle diseases. And unfortunately, medicine really has nothing for that because you can't cure lifestyle diseases with pills and potions and surgery. And so that's where, a lot of my clientele anyway, like I deal with a lot of complex issues and mostly complex issues. And so for a lot of those people, they've come through that medical system already. And they've now realized, well, gosh, maybe I need to start looking into holistic nutrition or functional medicine or what have you. And then they found solutions through there. And now they're actually using natural health products and alternative means to support their health long term. And so, of course, as we, as I look at what's going on, we'll talk today about what's going on with the current state of things, but there's a long history leading up to this. And I think for a lot of people that are kind of waking up right now and going, oh my gosh, like Bill C-47 has come into law. And, I think Melody will talk a little bit about what the confusion is there. People are sort of going, oh my gosh, our natural health products are under threat, which is correct. And this is all happening right now. But my foray into all of this, into the activist side of things, was actually back in 07, 08 with C-51. And C-51, C-52, Bill C-8, if you can go back into the 90s, this has been going on for decades. And they've been slowly trying to strangle out natural medicine and natural healthcare by overregulation, is simply the way to put it. And you can go even further back into the turn of the last century, where we actually had a lot of homeopathic colleges. I think at one point there were more homeopathic colleges and sort of like natural medicine colleges, so to speak. And that's when the American Medical Association came along and systematically shut them all down in favor of a drug/pharmaceutical system, which is kind of where we are now. So, the origins of what we're witnessing today go back, 100, 150 years, if you want to look at it like that.
Yeah. I mean, what's happening today is not necessarily, well, no, it's not new. It's just that maybe it's more of a sense of urgency now. Like things are actually moving in a direction that does not support natural health products at all.
Yeah.
Right. So Melody, what about you? We briefly touched on why you're doing what you're doing, but you're also part of this association, an important part of it.
Well, yeah. And, coming at it from a different background, I mean, I spent most of my life completely, under the veil of the conventional medicine system, and had a lot of issues, even as a young child. I mean, I had scoliosis. I went through several surgeries and, just listen to everything the doctor says. And over time, it started to lead to really chronic, debilitating levels of pain. And I was in my 20s and 30s, I just couldn't, there wasn't enough painkillers. Okay. And my lifestyle, I lived in Toronto. I had a really busy career in advertising and marketing, very active social life. I was on the go all the time. And it never, ever once came up for my doctor. Well, until a couple of other instances, but she says, you might need to de-stress and, take care of your stress a little bit. But it wasn't like an urgent, you have to, take time out to relax and sleep and that sort of thing. It's like, so what do? I take up sailing and get into the sailing and racing community. And, I just added more and more stress. So there's a complete disconnect between any of the education that I ever got. And it was just, here's another pill. And it got to the point I was just, I literally thought I must be dying. And it was, I took off for a few weeks on vacation to try and figure things out. And intuitively, something said to me, and it's probably a message from God. I don't know, call it what you want, but you need to know something about nutrition. And I came home and I started researching, and at that time, Google was very limited. But I stumbled across the Canadian School of Natural Nutrition, looked at the curriculum, and it just blew my mind. I'd never heard of, body, mind, spirit, and holistic concepts and that sort of thing before. So I just dove in, and I was still very skeptical. Can food matter, right? And after 3 months of just making some subtle changes, because the intro classes don't tell you as much as we know now, but I cut my pain in half, started sleeping better, felt more functional, like my brain, the brain fog started lifting, like everything, it was improving so dramatically fast. And I thought, okay, something's really here. And so I just put everything into it. And that was in 2008. So, fast forward 15 years, but it took me a couple of years, into the program to figure out what was really going on. And what I found actually was that I had very severe fibromyalgia, and complicated by, spinal issues and that sort of thing. So I was able within 3 years, because that was the fundamentals course, right? But you still need to dive deeper down some rabbit holes, and figured things out. And I've been virtually pain-free for over 10 years now. So I'm so grateful every day that, I got led into this direction. And since then, it's been sort of my mission to help people realize that, the limitations of the conventional medicine. And like both of you had said, like, if I get hit by a bus, like, please take me to the emergency room. But as far as the lifestyle driven diseases, and where food really matters, and it's also just teaching people the simplicity of, how to put foods together, how to assess quality of food, and that sort of thing. Like, it might sound so simple, but it's really the starting point. And you can't, and just like, in conventional medicine, you can't supplement your way out of a bad diet and lifestyle. It's just like replacing the same mindset in the natural health space. Yes, they're very, very helpful, and they're tools, but they go, hand in hand with the lifestyle changes and the food changes. So yeah, helping people with fibromyalgia is sort of my sweet spot. But I also got into the workplace wellness space because of the levels of stress that I witnessed, the toxicity in the workplaces. And I thought, well, that's really where I can make a really big impact. And so I have sort of both going, although the workplace stuff kind of took a bit of a backseat during COVID, because everything,
like a lot of other things.
a lot of it. So yeah, so I'm really focusing more on creating my the program for people with chronic pain and fibromyalgia.
Amazing. That's amazing. I'm going to say this because obviously, I've had family members who have had a heart attack. My daughter, when she needed to have 2 surgeries to remove that tumor, I am never going to say anything negative about the place Western medicine has in health. What I personally always say is we need to marry all areas of wellness in order to really have, when I say holistic, I'm spelling it WHOLE, holistic. And Western medicine, like you were saying, it's like one little piece of that. But without the others, I wouldn't be here. I was doing IV therapies with my naturopath doctor. I was rebuilding my function of my adrenals. And then they were telling me that, here, take 1 pill after you have your thyroid removed and all will be fine. Well, I had 2 little kids and I was on the couch and I wasn't able to go out and play with them in the park. That's how bad it was. So I was like, well, where do I go now? Where do I go? What do I do? They told me I'd be fine. I'm not fine. Right? So this is why I am so passionate, because I wouldn't be here now if it weren't for natural health products. I'm sure, you guys obviously wouldn't be here either. So maybe let's get into some of these, like maybe not go too deep into the bills, but mention which ones are applicable to this and maybe high level. Why is there a threat with natural health products?
Do you want to take that one, Melody?
Well, as you've already, introduced the concept, Brett, this goes back 100 years. Like, this is not new. I think given the last few years, especially, the pharmaceutical industry is probably feeling more of a threat than ever from natural health products, because more and more people are gravitating to that. And they've really stepped up the pressure now to try and suppress, eliminate, censor, or whatever you want to call it. And the self-care framework, it's back up. I think it was 2004 that the previous natural health product regulations came about. There was a few years leading up to that, but it was supposed to be the appropriate way, although we could argue it's still classified as a subset of the drugs regulations in Canada. We would have preferred it to be under food, because it is more like food. They're very complex constituents in all supplements. So what they started introducing in, I think it was 2017, was something called the self-care framework. And this is and I went to the very first consultation, Health Canada's consultation meeting. It was in Saskatoon, believe it or not. And I took photos of every slide. I recorded the whole thing, sent the whole package to Sean. I'm like, all right, what's really going on here? And Sean Buckley is really the expert in Canada as far as understanding the intricacies of how the law is applied in the natural health products segment. And he has understood this direction for a very long time. In all these 15 years, he's not been wrong once. Okay, so even if you can't see the leap from what it says to what it means, it's because they use language that is, I would say, intentionally a bit confusing.
Who's they, Melody? This is the government or Health Canada? Like, where's
Health Canada? Yeah,
Health Canada.
The way they write up the regulations, it's not easily understood by us laymen. It does require some interpretation. And that's where Sean has really seen how it's interpreted, how it's applied, because of all his time and experience in courts, helping the supplement companies who've had their products, just randomly almost taken off the market for various reasons. And he's been successfully able to get them back on the market, because he's been able to prove with evidence and with testimonies that the removal of those products caused more harm and death. And so we can go down the weeds in that, but Sean's done some extensive videos on these cases, and you can read about them as well to get into more detail. But I think for the high level that we're covering today, essentially where we're at today and why we've really stepped up action now is because the self-care framework that they introduced back in 2017, 2018 is being rolled out. Okay, the first phase was changes to the labeling. Okay, so now a lot of the products in Canada, they have to have like these double label peel off labels so that they can get all the information in there. And that was a significant cost to the industry as well. And a lot of people complain, well, I can't read it anyway, so it's too fine print. But the limitations on the labeling are still very specific to the research that was submitted with the product applications, okay, to get their NPN, to get their licensing. Yes. So you still don't get the whole picture. I mean, every product has multiple benefits, multiple system benefits throughout the body. Nothing works in isolation for just one thing, right? And a lot of the labels are very limited to structure function claims. So things like will support mental health or will support general immune system, if you can even say that at times.
I was going to say, aren't there, like, I have to interject here, because I thought at one point that they weren't allowed to put those claims on supplements in Canada.
Well, if you read them, they're very high level.
Okay.
They're just very high level. They're not going to get into a lot of the specifics, but it's with intention when the manufacturers submit the application that they have to provide research to show that these ingredients have this benefit.
Well, that makes sense.
Can I interject for a second?
Yeah.
It actually comes back to the way that they're regulated, right? And as Melody was saying, because they're regulated as a subset of the drug side of things, right? There's actually something called the NHPD, which is a Natural Health Products Directorate, and that nestles underneath the drug side of things. So because they're technically regulated as drugs, they have to make a label claim. You cannot have a drug on the market without a label claim. So this is actually part of the problem moving forward now, is because now as they step up the approval side of things, one of the things in the updates that we're looking at is they are making it very difficult, or they're making it harder for products to be approved.
Yes.
Right. So it's like you have to undergo, like, whether it's clinical trials or what have you. And now you can imagine for a single ingredient product, one, I mean, it's super expensive to do a clinical trial. And if you can't patent something like vitamin C or whatever, well, who's got the money to do a clinical trial? A small trial is $1.5 million. And then you go up from there.
Hey, can I ask you a question? So I know a few supplement manufacturers. I know the actual founder, and let's just say, for an example, spermidine. Okay. Spermidine, it's big. Everyone's talking about spermidine. It helps to induce autophagy. But I also know that it's virtually impossible for them to come to Canada. Impossible, because of the costs, because of the labeling, so are you saying, Brett and Melody, that let's just say I own a spermidine company in Nebraska, just saying, and I want to bring it to Canada, I would have to do my own clinical trials in order to bring that product to Canada?
Well, at the moment, no, but this is where it's going. So in a nutshell, just to zoom out, right? What they're doing is they want to, it's called harmonization. So, and this is, part of the international side of things, is they want to harmonize the regulatory side of things. So what harmonizing means is we want to make it more difficult for natural health products to be approved, and we want to make it easier for drugs to be approved. So that's what harmonizing means, right? So coming back to your question, we don't know yet exactly what that's going to look like. And, will there be some kind of grandfathering in for things that are already approved? Not really. But for something like that, which is more of a novel type of product, I can tell you right now that you're probably going to have, there's going to be astronomical costs associated with coming into another country. And not only that, when you get into the costs, because I was actually looking at this last night, I asked Melody, I was like, send me something, because I want to have a look at this. And I read through the way that they structured the costs, right? So coming back to something you said earlier, right? What are the big ticket items here that we're looking at? We're looking at imposed and increased fees on the manufacturers, right? That's the big one. And then there's a whole bunch of sort of bullet points that go underneath that.
Yeah.
Then you're looking at advertising. Okay, so the advertising and the label claims and that sort of thing. And then the third one is you're looking at self-care framework, which gets into over-the-counter versus, that type of thing, right?
Yes,
so self-care, Vanessa's Law, et cetera. And you can
umbrella.
explain that in a minute, Melody. So when you look at the costs, the way that they've calculated these costs, right? So the main sort of overarching theme is, according to Health Canada and the government, like, oh my gosh, we need to go out there and regulate natural health products even more because there's a safety concern. Okay, so in the name of safety, we need to go out there and we need to police this industry because we're concerned about people's safety, right? And of course, if you're sitting there as a regular person, you go, well, of course we want to be safe. Although a safe society is also a very anxious society when you get beat with safety all the time. So what they do is they go, okay, my gosh, we need to go out there because for safety reasons. And, the NHPPA has actually done statistical analyses with statisticians. You can see that on the website, and NHPs have an impeccable safety record. So the whole safety argument is kind of moot when you actually look at the numbers. Okay. The last person that died from a supplement, as far as we know, was somewhere in the 60s. And who knows why they died, right? Whether it's an allergic reaction or what have you. And
But-
this is just to wrap up something here. And this is why in the US, the supplements they're not regulated at all. Aside from GMP and these types of things, they're completely different, right? So when they looked at the costs, right, what they did was they said, okay, if we want to now impose these fees on manufacturers, right, in the name of safety, what they did was they looked at 3 years of data. I believe it was from 2019, 2020, and 2021. And they said, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to we need to create more jobs, all right, in order to enforce these new regulations. So what they're doing is they're saying, based on the cost of those jobs, of the people to actually keep track of all the stuff, whether it's licensing fees, whether it's inspections, whatever it is, we've got all of these increased costs now that the government has acquired in order to police this industry, and those costs are being put on the manufacturers. Now, to cut to the chase here, to give you some sense of there's first of all, there's multiple different costs, whether it's renewals, whether it's licensing, whatever it is, there's a whole bunch of them on there. And when you get into the more complex formulations, which is what people like us might use as practitioners, we're using multi-ingredient formulations that are very, very niche. They're professional grade products, which you need to know what you're talking about and what you're doing when you use them. Some of these, if you're looking at the licensing fees and these fees that are being imposed, just for one fee could be up to $75,000 for one product.
Mhm.
So, the point here is that as you impose all of these fees, the ripple down effect is that in order to actually operate in the space as a manufacturer, your costs are about to go through the roof in the next 6 to 12 months. And I'm talking about we're talking about through the roof, to the point where most medium and small manufacturers will not be able to stay in business. It will be impossible. And if you look at the restocking and licensing fees per product, what happens if you've got 100 SKUs or 200 SKUs? That's not a licensing fee for the company. That's a fees per product in your whole product line.
Yeah.
So
Those are
this
annual.
and then ripple all of that down onto the distributors, right? So now the distribution companies, what are their costs going to be to now distribute that? Then you look at the retailers, what is their cost going to be to stock and sell these supplements? What is the cost for us as practitioners? And then, of course, all the way down the line is what are the costs to consumers?
Okay.
And
Can I ask you a question? Because this is, I think anybody who's listening is going to have this question. Who came up with saying that pharmaceuticals should be regulated the same as a natural health product in the first place? Like, I heard about, what is it, Vanessa's Law?
Yeah.
Like, where did this even come from? Because trust me, I live on pharmaceutical drugs, some because I have to. I don't have a vital organ, but I also take a lot of supplements. And the pharmaceuticals come with very, very different regulatory, like I have to be careful of this and this and this. And if I take too much thyroid medication, I could die.
Mhm.
So if
Well,
you take too much vitamin C, maybe you're going to have the poops. But come on, who came up with this in the first place? It gets me a little fired up. I'm probably going to fire you guys up now too.
Well, and it should get people fired up. This is not to be taken lightly at all. So let me back up again to where the self-care framework came out, a few years ago. And we have one of our friends of NHPPA did a Access to Information Act on the origins of who came up with this crazy plan. And there was 4 bureaucrats at Health Canada that came up with this plan. And just to give you the general overview of what this is, the self-care framework, I like to look at it to simplify how to understand it. It's like an umbrella. Self-care. What products are used for self-care? And they lumped, under this umbrella, sort of 3 categories: over-the-counter pharmaceutical drugs. So things like you might find at a drugstore that's on the shelves that you don't need a prescription for.
Yeah.
Natural health products. And then they kind of threw like cosmetics and toothpaste and deodorant under this umbrella as well. So like they're all drastically different things. But this is where, Brett mentioned like this harmonization, modernization, and they use all these words to make it sound like this is all for our benefit. And there's one sentence within that whole framework that really jumps out, and it says something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing here, but these will only be products where it's, to help with conditions that you would not seek a consultation with a licensed medical professional. If we pause just on that categorization, you can go and buy painkillers like acetaminophen, for example, which are very different from buying a tube of trauma care.
Yes.
They're night and day different. They don't work on the same biochemical processes in the body. They don't work the same. And they're certainly nowhere comparable in ingredients. Okay, but yet they want to harmonize the requirements for the licensing, which gets back into what Brett was saying. Does that mean that all products under this umbrella now need to do double-blind placebo clinical trials? We don't know. And these are the questions that are still kind of outstanding, but I know Sean has tried calling Health Canada to get more clarification. Like, for instance, are compounding products going to still be available? Or traditional, TCM herbal blends of things, homeopathics. We don't have all the answers yet, and they're being extremely vague to this day about what are the specific then requirements going to be. But projecting out to what Sean knows like their end game is, it's going to be more difficult for natural health products to get to be on the market. And then looking at which products are going to be available for self-care, not requiring consultation. So which conditions? And the conditions that were listed as examples were very, very minor conditions left. So does that mean any of the natural health products that are for more complex conditions, you're going to have to get a prescription? It's gonna take away, the number of products that are currently on the shelves and available, and increase censorship. So
But what it takes away is just the ability to be proactive with your care.
yeah.
Like, for example, if I take a little bit of milk thistle because I know that's like beautiful for my liver, you're going to take that away from me so I can't be proactive with my liver health and be proactive before a problem occurs. And so then I have to see a doctor when I already have issues with my liver. Yeah. Like, is that what the framework is going to look like?
Well, and this circles all the way back to what I was saying before, right? So if you look, it's a paradigm shift in healthcare that's happening, right? So if you look at what you just said now, just take a look out there, right? There's no prevention in our healthcare system whatsoever. Okay, aside from maybe taking a baby aspirin to keep your blood thin or something along those lines, prevention is not part of the healthcare system. The healthcare system is designed to keep you in the system. And if I'm a drug company, the goal is to keep you on drugs, right? Because I want to sell you more drugs, and that's the system, right?
To manage
So
your
like if you,
disease, right?
and this is what I've been saying for years. I keep telling people, I said, look, if everyone wants to go out there and you just take a look at the news, take a look at the politicians, what are they saying? They're saying that the healthcare system is broken. We have a doctor shortage. We're overrun, blah, blah, blah. And it's sort of like, okay, well, we don't really have a doctor shortage or a hospital shortage. We actually have too many sick people. And so if you actually put preventative healthcare, true preventative healthcare, restorative healthcare on the front of the healthcare system, you will actually have fewer people coming out the back end, requiring surgery, requiring drugs, and requiring doctor's visits. This is it's not a difficult concept to wrap your head around, but the thing is, they don't want that. And now if you look at Health Canada, back not that long ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 54% of their funding was coming from pharmaceutical companies. I'm going to say that again. 54% of their funding, Health Canada's funding, was coming from pharmaceutical companies.
And the
Now,
number's much higher now. Yeah.
now that's 90%.
Oh, shit.
So I want you to ask yourself here, okay, if I was sitting there and I had my major donor, my major source of funding, right, was the drug company, do you think that my policies and the things that I would be putting in place, do you think that it would favor, or like you do what the boss tells you, right? So,
Ding, 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 ding.
The conflict of interest.
it's a massive conflict of interest. We can talk about the international side of things. We can get into that later, but this is, in a nutshell, this is where the real problem lies. So when you talk about making it easier for drug approval, you're basically removing the checks and balances that are in place. And I want to speak to that, to be very clear. Drugs are single molecules. They're patentable, right? They're very, very narrow in their action. Yes, you could talk about metformin or something that is a little bit more broad, but generally speaking, the way that they're regulated and the reason why they're regulated like that is because they're very narrow in their focus. They're potentized extracts and chemicals that have a high risk in terms of side effects. Okay. And so if you have something that's patentable, that's very, very straightforward, it's easier to regulate that because you simply say, hey, A plus B equals C, and there you go, and we can do that 100 times over, and A plus B equals C 100 times, good, right? But when you get into natural, like health products, you take ginger, for example, it's got 400 different compounds in it. You start working with berberine as an example, which the CBC is now trying to smear. Berberine works on multiple different mechanisms, right? Whether it's balancing lipid profiles, it works as a broad spectrum antimicrobial. It helps to balance blood sugar. There's clinical studies on the use and efficacy of berberine for type 2 diabetes, and you can keep going. So now, how do you apply drug style regulations to something like berberine, which is very broad in its action, and then extrapolate that onto berberine plus alpha lipoic acid plus chromium plus magnesium, and now you have a multi-ingredient formula. The writing is pretty clear on the wall that effectively these products will be strangled out because there is no way that you can subscribe to drug style regulations or the quote unquote science behind that.
What you just said really clarified everything. And I just want to add to this, there's also change in care, in actual care when you go see your physician. And I think this is an important thing I just want to mention. I saw my physician. I'm a 53-year-old woman, very common for 53-year-old women to see a little bit of a rise in your cholesterol. Had the discussion with my general physician. I said, no, I do not want to go on statins, but can you please check really more what's going on a little deeper with my LDL? And the answer, and this is a quote, I cannot test further unless you go on a statin, Sandy. Sorry, it has to end here. So my care was ended, even though I wanted to see what was that LDL comprised of exactly. Is it, because we all know not all LDL is bad, right? So that's where my care ended because I chose not to go on a statin. So I think that, and this is a real life example, it's happening all the time, but it really aligns with what you just said, Brett, what you just said.
Yeah.
Well, and yeah, go ahead, Melody.
I was just going to say, I see this all the time with clients, and I've been an advocate for my parents this is why I moved to Saskatoon. It was actually, they were having so many health challenges and it was getting more and more complicated. And I really needed to be at their appointments because they couldn't articulate for themselves the questions that needed to be asked to dig deeper down to the root cause. And so this is where, a holistic health perspective and conventional medicine, they just butt heads. I wanted to look deeper into, like, can we get the full thyroid panel? I finally got my mom to understand like some of her side effects were what's causing her pain and stuff. She went off her statins. Her doctor stopped getting the cholesterol testing as part of her panels. And it's like, yeah, you know, they are also strangled. So I'm not blaming the doctors themselves.
No.
They have very specific things they're allowed to test for, and they need to document every
Yep.
single symptom to rationalize requesting that test.
Yep.
It's
I know
the
my mom's
system.
doctor he's been under the scrutiny of the medical system for a while. I
Yes.
think, you know, he's lost his privileges at the hospital twice because he went a little bit rogue. And so
But
now
he's trying to do the right thing. He's trying
well,
to
I
do
don't
the right
know
thing.
that, you know, I can't even say that he went that far because I don't know the specific situation that happened, but he has to document every single thing. And so, you know, I go into the appointment with her saying, okay, and last time, this is a couple of weeks ago, wrote up a couple of pages. Okay, here's all her symptoms, here's all her issues, here's what's going on. This is what I suspect. Over to you. Because she's on a bunch of medications that have to be part of the, you know, analysis. I can't do this, you know, in isolation. So I lobbed the ball over to him. And he said, okay, I'll take it away and look at it. And she got the phone call the other day and he had nothing for her.
Mhm.
Oh, it's just your age. Oh, it's just so.
Oh, I've heard that for my
So,
Yeah.
you know, here we are. Like, you know, I think, yeah, in the ideal world, can we please work together to
Yes.
solve some of these issues for people? And I think we're a long way away from that. But so back to the regulatory issues, you know, strangling out some of the tools that we need and can use with our patients and clients. This is where, you know, our entire industry, and it's not just about the supplements at this stage. If the number of supplements that are available, especially the more complex ones that we can use in the clinical settings, are not available, how are we going to be able to help our clients? So it impacts every stakeholder in the bunch. And this is, you know, NHPPA has always said, you know, the stakeholders really are the manufacturers, the retailers, practitioners, and the consumers. It impacts every single one of us. So if anybody out there thinks, oh, this is just a manufacturer problem right now, because the highlighted issue of the day right now, or well, up until August 10th, was this fees consultation process that was online. And we're done. Like, that's it. That was all there was to it. It's like, no, we're far from done. This is, you know, Bill C-47, and this is another part of the confusion. So people, and I see it in how they're writing their letters and how they're speaking to issues. People were under the impression that Bill C-47 was this health bill that passed. No. Bill C-47 was the budget bill. And what they did was they buried 4 sections in the budget bill, sections 500 and 504, and the wording was very confusing. You really have to be a legal brain to understand this. I actually had to get Sean to take me through step by step. What does this mean? And so I'm going to tell you, it had one sentence, and then below it said, and this will be repealed. Okay, so it's like, well, it seemed like they were putting in a definition, but actually what it did was repealing or removing the natural health product exemption. Now remember, the big umbrella current regulation is it is under the chemical drug regulations. It just removed the natural health product exemption. That's how Vanessa's law came in. That's how these $5 million penalties can come in. Exactly. So we have to understand they snuck this in to the budget bill, which got passed very quickly before they all went off on vacation at the end of the session, June 22nd. All right. Like, underhanded. I don't think there would be one MP in that entire 338 of them that would have understood what those phrases meant.
No.
Okay. It just went through. Sean, our first videos that we did with NHPPA, the call to action was really call your MP, get them to remove these sections before the bill passes. A week later, they passed. So now the call to action is repeal. And so repeal sections 500 and 504. Second thing was that's gotten the big highlight the last few weeks because this deadline was quickly approaching on the fees. So these cost recovery fees, which include site license fees, application fees, reseller fees, and all kinds of other things that they're just making up now to generate revenue. That consultation ended August 10th. Now they're going to go off and do a report and publish it. But, you know, from the very beginning of this self-care framework back in 2017, it was said that this is non-negotiable. Like, who says this is non-negotiable, right? So the train left the station 5 years ago. And here's part of the other issue is why we're having so much trouble getting people to understand things is CHFA, and this is the Canadian Health Food Association, which has a lot of members, not just food companies, but supplement manufacturers as well. And a lot of the supplement manufacturers are now pharmaceutical companies, by the way, owned by pharmaceutical companies.
Oh.
CHFA at the time when we were trying to blow the whistle and, you know, and we did a campaign back then as well to educate the public on what this all meant, because Sean, you know, did the analysis, said there's nothing wrong here, everything's fine. It's fine, really? And so we've been dealing with this, you know, Health Food Association that, you know, wants to be like they're, you know, looking out for all their members' best interest, and yet they, for some reason, and you know, we can speculate all we want, but for some reason are letting them think that nothing's wrong here, you'll be fine. And so we're, now that all these fees things have really, you know, come to light, and these fees, like, by the way, this was known back then as well. Sean, you can go back to Sean's discussion papers 5 years ago. He outlined all this, that this was coming. And so this should not come as a big shock to anybody. But CHFA's position, they did, you know, do a smaller, you know, let's just say not as comprehensive campaign perspective than NHPPA came out with several weeks ago. They're highlighting the Vanessa's Law piece. They're highlighting some of this other stuff. And they did, you know, say, you know, yes, you should go and put your comments into this online consultation. But they are still staying silent on the overall self-care framework and all the rest of the pieces. So this is where a lot of the other confusion is coming in, because people are under the impression like, oh, well, we've already passed the deadline, we're done. You know, no, we're not. Those specific things have already happened, and they still need to have action to get resolved. And the rest of the pieces, essentially our call to action is repeal, like I said, repeal section 500 to 504. So we can get, you know, remove the Vanessa's Law again, undo the $5 million penalties. I'm going to, Brad, if you want to speak to that in a minute too.
Oh, yeah.
Lob that one back over to you, but I think this is where people in our industry really need to be clear on what this means to us. And when we go out in public and speak about things, like never before has this been more serious.
So, okay, hold on. The what did you say, $5 million? Is that what the penalty is?
Up to, yeah.
Up to. Okay, and this is for what?
Non-compliance. So it's a broad term.
Very broad.
Like, so
Yeah.
what, if I go and I talk about berberine, I can get in shit and get a $5 million
So
fine?
if I can speak to that,
please
just
do.
because I've
Please do.
covered this with Sean, because there's also confusion about that.
Please.
So like, it comes back to label claims, right? So if you look at, let's just use a B complex as an example. If you look at any B complex on the market, they're simply going to say helps with the metabolism of proteins, carbs, and fats, right? Boom. So if I was out there talking about a B complex and I said that, which is on the label, right? And I'm now selling, this is a real key distinction here, and I'm selling that B complex, I'm in compliance, but I'm selling it. Okay, that's the big difference. And I'm selling it publicly. So I'll just sort of briefly skirt around here and say that if you have a private relationship with a practitioner, so if I was in consultation with you as you were my client, and I said to you that B complex will make your hair grow back and clear up toenail fungus and make you lose weight and whatever, that's a private conversation between you and me. That's different.
Okay.
What we're talking about publicly, if I was to publicly say those things and then I was also selling those things, I would be out of compliance with what the label is saying, right? And that's where you get into trouble. So we actually do have naturopaths right now, because remember that C47 has now become law. So this is no longer a bill, and this is very, very different from what we've dealt with in the past with C51, C52, C8, et cetera, et cetera. These were all bills that we managed to squash them before they even became law. Now this has become law, which means that everything that's currently on there is enforceable. And we're starting to see naturopathic doctors that have made claims about things like intravenous vitamin C that have been quote unquote off label, and they are actually getting dinged with astronomical fines.
Really?
And those fines could be up to $5 million per day, which I don't think would be I don't think that they're going to do that with practitioners. I think that would be more for manufacturers who are not in compliance of whatever. And that is the maximum fine. So to give you some idea of what the maximum was before, it was about 5,000 a day.
5,000 per incident.
Per incident, yeah, but per incident per day. Now this could be up to 5 million per incident per day. So, I mean, like, you can imagine you're a naturopathic doctor and you get a $250,000 fine for saying that IV, vitamin C can help with cancer, as an example, right? That's real world. That's actually what's happening right now.
And this $5 million is not just for the corporation. It actually is for the directors, all president, like everybody involved personally is also on the hook for these fines. So it pierces the corporate veil. And if people don't think these fines are, this is to destroy. This is not to deter.
Yeah, if you're a naturopath getting a $250,000 fine or 500,000, you're done. I mean, pack up shop. Hopefully, you can pay it and then carry on with your life and do something else.
You're done.
Yeah.
Okay, I have to shift gears here. Because this is something, a comment that I've heard, and I have to, because everyone's going to say this might come up. I have heard from people, oh, well, it's a good thing some regulations are going to be put into place because I can buy anything I want at Costco and Walmart, and who's to say that what I buy is on the label? Now we're going to know for sure. What are your thoughts on that?
That's a moot point, because right now manufacturers under the current regulations have to subscribe to what are called GMP. GMP is good manufacturing practices. They all have to have certificates of analysis. So end of conversation, really. Like, if you have an NPN number, first of all, you have to have an NPN number, which is a natural product number, or you have to have a DIN homeopathic number in order to be able to sell it in Canada, first of all. In order to get that label, like the NPN number or whatever, you have to submit certificates of analysis. Okay, so that's just really it. Could they be using inferior ingredients? Could they be using ginkgo biloba from China that's also contaminated with something? Sure. But I don't think that's, most of that, because I've done podcasts on this as well many years ago, most of that is not because the manufacturers are necessarily trying to deceive people on purpose. What it really is the source of their ingredients that they're getting. So particularly, this is more problematic with herbal ingredients, and less so with, your amino acids or vitamins or minerals or what have you.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to mention that because I've heard that statement a lot. Let's shift gears to talk about how all of what's happening in Canada really ties into a much bigger picture, something called One Health. And this is from the World Health Organization. I think it's good to explain the tie-in and the connection.
Sure. I'll take this one, Melody, because it's I know we discussed that. It's a bit more in my wheelhouse. No, it's a very complex situation, all right. And I think it's important just to tee up what I'm about to say. There's some things that are very clear, and then there's some things where the lines are not as clear. Okay, and so the reason why I say that is if you look at, you know, just take a look at the last 3 years, and we could actually extend that further back. But what we've witnessed is we are currently witnessing the centralized consolidation of power at the upper echelons, right? So if you look at on a more sort of Canadian-centric scale, take a look at British Columbia and have a look at what's happening with the Ministry of Health there, right? They've passed a bill whereby they basically want to get rid of all of the colleges, right? So the colleges of College of Nurses, College of Homeopaths, College of whatever. And what they're doing is they're trying to consolidate that underneath the Ministry of Health. And so in other words, the Ministry of Health will have top-down governance of all practitioners, right? Both medical and alternative. So that's one aspect, right? But the thing is, when you look at the international side of things, not everything is happening in every country in the same way. Okay, so that's important. So when you look at what's going on in the US, for example, because I know a lot of your listeners are there, I would encourage them to check out the Alliance for Natural Health. They're doing somewhat similar things to what the NHPPA is doing. And you'll see that there is the same type of thing. There's a similar type of erosion with natural health products there. It's just happening differently because they're not regulated, right? So you'll see things like N-acetylcysteine, for example, in the US. I mean, they've been working really, really hard to get N-acetylcysteine banned outright. Okay, but they have to do it differently because of the way that the regulations and the laws work from country to country. So that's important as well, right? Because I don't want people to go out there and go, oh my gosh, we look at One Health or the World Health Organization, and well, it doesn't look the same in Canada, and it's not the same in the UK, and it's not the same in Africa. These guys are just making stuff up. Okay, that's just not the case. I think, let's push One Health aside for now, because I think there's something more clear for people to understand. And that is, I've done podcasts on this as well with a guy by the name of James Rogowski. People can look him up. James has done extensive work on this. Hats off to the work that he's done over the last couple of years. And what his main focus is the amendments to something called the International Health Regulations. And so the International Health Regulations, if you go back in time, these were basically a set of regulations that all member states of the World Health Organization agreed to, where they said, hey, in the case of, just in terms of good global governance and global healthcare, there's some things that we need to agree on in terms of policy. Okay. And generally, there was nothing nefarious per se. It was simply, hey, if this happens, can we all agree that we're going to be doing this thing over here? And everyone sort of said, yeah, sure, no problem. Now what's happening, though, is with the amendments to the International Health Regulations, which is currently underway. So the last meeting they had was about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And they've had these periodic meetings over the last while. And essentially, unironically, these amendments popped up near the beginning of the pandemic. All right. And so what they said was, now, if you look at the rhetoric and the verbiage around that, they sort of go, well, look at what happened over the last 3 years. Like, we really need to be prepared for, another potential pandemic or whatever the case may be. And so what those amendments have done, though, there's some very, very striking changes to what the IHR was and what they're looking to do with it now. And one of them is, and I'm going to botch the naming here, so I'll paraphrase, but it's essentially the removal of your personal rights. Okay, is one big piece of that. Because now, can you imagine, right? So now we have a global pandemic. It's like, holy smokes, like the whole world is under threat. Your personal rights don't really matter anymore. Okay, because we need to do everything that we can possibly do here to save the planet. Okay, to save the people. That's kind of the thinking behind that, right? Which we know well, we can talk about that if you want. But the other thing is, if you go back in time, prior to these amendments, which I don't know where they're at. They're sort of ratifying things right now. I'm not sure if it's fully implemented yet. But historically, what would happen is, like, if we had an outbreak of Ebola here in my town, okay, and let's say one person had Ebola, they went to the hospital, they got tested. What my town would do is they would say, okay, we've got this under control. Maybe we're going to contact the Ministry of Health and just say, hey, we've got one person with Ebola here, but everything's contained, like we're good. Okay, and the Ministry of Health says, sure, no problem. World Health Organization perhaps would get notified if we wanted, very important, if we wanted them to be notified, and probably nothing would come of it. And under that relationship, what would happen is we would simply say, or the World Health Organization would go, if you need our help, we're here to help. Okay, if you need our help. Now, under the new amendments, that is flipped around completely, whereby if you have one case of Ebola in my town here, the regional director for the World Health Organization can declare a global pandemic. Right, which doesn't make any sense, right? A global pandemic for one case. So now I want you to think about what's happened over the last 3 years. What would that entail? What would the ripple effect be if we had another pandemic declared, right? We would probably see much of what we saw over the last 3 years. Okay, now it's important to sort of overlay that onto what are the policies here? And the policies, this is where it ties into what we're seeing on a local level here. One of the other amendments in the IHR is because we need to speed up our response. Okay, so we need to have a quicker response to the pandemic, whatever that new pandemic might be. And what's involved with that is we need to ramp up and speed up the approval of what are called medical countermeasures. What are medical countermeasures? I don't know if you want me to say it, but Captain Obvious, right? So we want drug approvals to be sped up. We want vaccines rushed to market so that we can counter the pandemic, right? The other thing is we want to make sure that we squash any misinformation out there. So increased funding for censorship. What would be construed as medical misinformation? Vitamin D, zinc, N-acetylcysteine, anything else, right? Chlorine dioxide, whatever it is. So anything else. And this is, I blew the whistle on this before the emergency use authorizations were approved in the US. I contacted Dr. James Lyons-Weiler, who's a good friend of mine, and I said, Jack, you got to look at this, man. I'm telling you, look at this EUA. Before anyone was talking about it, I said, look at the EUA. And I said, in order for them to approve something under emergency use, there must be no other viable treatment. What happened with hydroxychloroquine? What happened with ivermectin? What happened with all these things? So they basically said, well, these things don't work. And they had fake studies in the Lancet, right? 96,000 people in one study that said that hydroxychloroquine did not work. And it turned out that that study did not exist. There were no 96,000 people. That study got retracted and it never saw the light of day. Okay, so the point here is that when you look at this, now you sort of look at, okay, why is it that we're looking at natural health products here, right? So this is a harmonization, right? We want to speed up the approval of drugs. We want to speed up the approval of the medical side of things, and we want to make it harder for other natural health products.
Yeah.
Right? That's what's going on an international level. And, I don't know how far you want me to go here, but,
I'm going to just, I want you to go as far as you want to go, because I'm going to say just one thing is that, and Brett and I, we kind of touched on this before we started recording, but I recorded a show about COVID not long ago. It was just in the spring. Through COVID 3 years later, and everything that this medical doctor talked about in my show, people were saying, oh, that's conspiracy theory. That's fake. That's fake news. That's fake news. And I'm like, well, 3 years later, we find out it's not fake news. And so now I'd love for you to continue.
Well, I think, to what you just said, part of increased funding under this, when we talk about combating misinformation, it's one thing to say, okay, we need to basically squash anything else out. right? So we need to squash the natural health products out. That's one thing. But what about increased funding to combat for censorship? So like take a look out there. When people say things like follow the science, okay, when people talk about science, because I've spoken about this a lot as well, what you need to actually take a few steps back from that statement, and you need to start going, what is the science? Who controls the science?
Yes.
Right? Because there's a lot of published literature on science itself. And if you go and look at editors for The Lancet and the New England Journal of Medicine, they have openly stated that there are a lot of problems within the world of science, whether it's reproducibility and replication, there's publication bias. So in other words, there's omission, these types of things. And of course, we know that if pharmaceutical companies are funding studies, they have about a 30 to 40% more likelihood that the study will come out in favor of what they're trying to prove, right? So you need to look at it from that angle. And then, there's books written about this where if I forget what the name of the drug was, but, you have this drug and they do 70 trials on it. And 35 come out in favor and say there was either a slight benefit all the way up to a significant benefit. And then you got 35 studies that say, well, there's actually a negative effect, and all the way over to, like lots of side effects and a disastrous effect. Well, what do? They take the 35 that were in favor of the drug, and then they pick 2 or 3 from the other side, and they go, well, here, this is evidence, right? So this is evidence-based medicine. And so what's happening now is you've got practitioners and clinicians that are looking at the quote unquote evidence, and they're basing their opinion on the pool of data that is actually not accurate, because we're not seeing the entirety of the studies. So, when you think about that, and then again, I encourage people to go and look at the origin, the backstory to hydroxychloroquine. It's a very interesting story because that was a massive smear campaign. So if we're talking about increasing funding to combat misinformation, what does that mean? That means that the 75 peer-reviewed studies on vitamin D that shows unequivocally that it has a positive effect on COVID, that will be buried, plain and simple, because that is not in line with what they're pushing, right?
Right.
And this is essentially what's going on. So when you want to talk about censorship or conspiracy theories or whatever, the conspiracy theory term is simply a term that was created by the CIA and the government.
Yeah.
So now what you hear people, and I see this, people falling in this trap, is you simply have to parrot words like that and parrot words like far right and extremism and whatever else. And all of a sudden it's like a Pavlovian dog whistle where people go, oh my gosh, that is bad. And all of a sudden that's just simply fake news and whatever. And they just throw it right out. They don't even entertain that. And now we can see, after sort of post-mortem over the last 3 years, you can see that the majority of things that people like myself were talking about, these things have in fact come true, or in fact, are happening right now. And so I would encourage people not to dismiss these amendments to the IHR and to what we're talking about today with things like C47 and stuff. This is not like fear mongering or anything like that. This is real and it's happening. And we just have a bit of time now. There's about 6 to 12 months, I think, possibly even up to 18 months before we really see the full effects of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, those fees for the manufacturers, which is like we were saying, it's just one piece of it. So, bringing this back to the Canadian perspective for a second here, they want to have those fees in place by early 2025. Okay, but back to your point, I have seen one of the videos by Rogowski that you were talking about, and he said there is still time for each country to back out of this. All they have to do is write a letter saying, no, thank you.
Write a letter to who? Because here's the thing. I've written numerous letters. Okay.
Well, it's not from us. But
I have, listen, I've written a letter to the health minister, two. I've also written it more from a personal perspective. I've written it more for, with outlining the bill C-47, people get confused. And I know that there are some, didn't you guys, was it you guys or was it, see, I don't want to screw up on who wrote the letter, because there are some form letters out there. Then there was the whole Save Our Supplements campaign. That was CHFA, right?
FA, correct. Yeah.
Well, just
So-
clarify for a second what we're talking about. I was referring back to the One Health thing and kind of tossing the baton back to Brett here, because I'm sure you know, each country can get out of this.
Well,
It's
can I? I'll share
Yeah.
some
So
insider. I'll share
let's
some
just-
insider information on that because I just
Okay,
had a
finish that one,
conversation.
and then we can come back to like the Canadian
Yeah.
letters,
Yes.
because that's for a different thing. But,
Yeah, I mean, look, if
Okay.
you just go and look up James's Substack, I mean, the guy's done extensive work. He's got links for many different countries around the world with hyperlinks to email campaigns and letter campaigns that go straight to the politicians, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to undermine his work and waste our time here. But what's important here is that, and it's very confusing because there's the IHR amendments, there's also something called the pandemic treaty, and then there's something else going on as well. There's three things going on. But what actually happened, right? They went quiet when people got wind about 6 months ago. Their last meeting was actually more now, 8 months. Their last meeting was in December. Okay. And people like myself started making noise. Oh my gosh. And then we started getting wind of what was happening and they went quiet. And they started having these meetings in private, and they didn't update any of the publications that were out there in circulation. Now there's been more. They've rekindled that, right? So there's now stuff happening. There's stuff happening with the IHR and the World Health Organization. But they actually had member states. They had this period of submission over a few months where they said, "Hey, member states, you can write in with what you're happy with and not happy with about these amendments." And there are a whole bunch of member states that actually wrote in and they didn't hear anything back. They've basically been ignored. And so there's a whole bunch of countries out there that are pissed. They're not happy because they're like, well, hang on. Our people have looked at this. They've written to the politicians. We, the politicians and our government, are now approaching the World Health Organization and saying, hold up, there's some things here in these IHR amendments that we're not okay with, and they have been ignored. So what is the solution here? The solution really, and I know it's a very lofty thing to say, but in my mind, the solution here is that we all have to exit the World Health Organization, right? Because if this is a centralization of power and top-down control, the antidote to that is decentralization. And I would extrapolate that onto all fronts, right? You know, so that's really, and this is what his big campaign is about, is actually exit the WHO. And I think that, you know, I've said this publicly with Sean and with the NHPPA. If I was to go one step further, right, so we can talk about not regulating supplements here in Canada and getting the law repealed and whatever, I would actually like to go a whole step further and to highlight the deep corruption within Health Canada, which is 90% pharmaceutical funded, and the fact that the policies that we are experiencing here and are coming down the pipeline have not been generated by democratically elected government. These are coming from outside of Canada, which then brings into question, you know, are we still a sovereign nation here? And that's a much bigger thing, right? But in order to reclaim our power as citizens, I think we actually have to exit the WHO, to be honest with you. And we need to seriously take a look at the conflict of interest within Health Canada.
And that's a perfect segue into, you know, what's the responsibility of our MPs in all this? So now this is very political. I mean, it's got nothing to do with our health. It's all political, let's face it, and the control. But drilling that down to the next level, you know, every citizen, you know, depending on what generation you're from, but, you know, we used to believe that the MPs, this is Canadian, so it's minister of Parliament, or member of Parliament, sorry, are supposed to be representing their constituents in every riding.
They don't.
Well, it's exactly. They used to, I think, maybe in some day, some way. And I did have, you know, experiences way back in the day with Jack Layton in Toronto. He really actually stood for the people. You know, he came out to, for example, the sailing club I mentioned beginning of our conversation. We were going to get, our whole sailing community was about to get wiped off the map in Toronto. And he came out to bat for us. Basically, there was this waterfront redevelopment planning thing going on for Toronto. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised if this also wasn't future, you know, looking at what we know today about, you know, pushing people into cities and having more condensed things like that. When you look back on what was happening then, I think it was already starting then. But we got back on the map. I mean, it was very political, and they let the sailing community associations keep their land. And to this day, I mean, I thank Jack for bringing, you know, the media attention to it. He knew how to use the media to get attention to things and make things happen. I think we can get back to that, but it's going to take a lot of engagement of our MPs, not just the click, quick, and send emails. I mean, yes, they are under obligation to respond to every single email, letter, and phone call they get. I know, but
because I've tried multiple times and they do not.
I know, but it is on
one
record.
response from one MP.
Yeah.
And it was a canned response that didn't address anything that I put in the letter at all.
Yes. And I'm seeing those again today. I am truly seeing. However, I'm also seeing the strategies that is working with certain types of communication and certain, like asking them for a meeting. The MPs that are in place today, 90%, 95% of them weren't around when Bill C-51 was going on and all those things. Most of them have no idea the history of Health Canada and the regulations for natural health products. So the first stage of it is not being combative, not just, you know, writing a letter complaining about everything. That's not going to get you anywhere. Absolutely not. The first stage of this is really about educating the MP, helping them understand this affects your family too. You know, everybody's family. Do you take vitamin D? Do you take vitamin C ever?
I've done that. Yeah.
You know, like, so really engaging them and getting them to understand is the first step. They have no idea. Okay, these standard form letters that are coming back as certain replies are to keep these MPs in the dark and keep them lazy. If you go in and request a meeting, I'll give you an example. There's a group of practitioners out in Vancouver Island that set up a meeting with their MP. And I'll leave the names out of this at this stage because it's still a work in progress, and I'm kind of waiting to see the development that comes out of this. And it happens to be a Liberal MP. Okay, and just for context sake here, the Liberals are in let's just say they don't have the majority in Canada, but they are, like, this is our Prime Minister is Liberal, and so they don't have all the power yet that they want, but it's pretty close. Liberal MP letters that are coming back are 100% verbatim, and I'm telling you this because I see people engaged in our community are sending me copies of their letter that they went to their MP and the replies back from their MP. So I can tell you I'm seeing across the board, all the Liberal replies are exactly the same, except for this one. He has now, since this practitioner meeting with them a couple of weeks ago, he said he would dive into it. He has requested information from the Minister of Health and the Health Canada to see, like, what is all this regulation changes that are being proposed all about. And he's essentially feeding it back to this group. And so it's actually just validating everything that we're saying about what's going on, like Vanessa's law applies now and these $5 million penalties. It still puts the spin on it. It's like, oh, it's all for your safety. And, you know, gee, where have we been the last few days, last few years? But it's engaged him at a level that I think it's opening his eyes as well. Okay. It's still a work in progress, so I can't tell you, yet what the end result is, but it's encouraging. Okay. There's other MPs, depending on which party they're with right now, various degrees. The conservatives, for example, they're all now saying, oh, we really support you. We really, we want to have, protect access and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, all right, what specifically are you going to do? So it is about communication. It is about education of the MP, but it also requires specific asks. So don't write your letters just complaining about things. You have to also include what you want them to do. So this is where the NHPPA letter template will be really useful. You don't have to use it verbatim. You can take out pieces that you want, but I would encourage people to include their own personal story, make it personal.
Yep.
Let the MP know how natural health supplements have made an impact in your life. Like my story would be my fibromyalgia recovery. It goes hand in hand with other lifestyle and food changes I made, but without those supplements, it probably would have taken me a lot longer if I ever got to that, because I still take a few that support my well-being. Okay. Make it personal. Highlight the issues that we don't agree with and why. Highlight the points that Health Canada has really miscommunicated, let's put it, that there is no regulation right now that's protecting the safety of the supplements. We have world-class regulations right now. No other country, I don't think, has the level of regulation and the steps that we do. So, and they do have powers to recall product. I see the med effects come through. There's 100 per year on pharmaceutical drugs, and there might be one on supplements. And the last one I saw on a supplement was because the label didn't have these gummy bear something vitamins, that it could be a choking hazard for children under 4. That minor of a thing, and the company gladly recalled them and, changed the label. So that's part of it. And the 5 key asks at the end of these letters: 1, to repeal the section 500 to 504. Number 2, stop the recovery fees. And number 3, stop the entire self-care framework, because that's what takes you into that harmonization and modernization, blah, blah, blah.
It's the umbrella that you were talking about.
The umbrella. Yeah. Which, by the way, the fees, these cost recovery fees, is just one part of that self-care recovery framework. This framework is massive. Okay. And that is still being pushed slowly ahead, but they're carving out these smaller pieces of it. And then the third thing was the Charter of Health Freedom. Now, I have to tell you, Charter of Health Freedom is something we haven't talked about here at all yet, but it's something that was put together by Sean and a number of stakeholders about 15 years ago. I think it was 2008. And it is written in such a way that it could be a piece of law passed as is. And I'll just give you a couple of the highlights, but it essentially takes everything natural health in Canada. So whether it's supplements, practitioners, various modalities, could be, energetic devices, all the new quantum devices that are coming out now, all these kinds of things, everything natural health, and moves it under a new Ministry of Wellness. So Health Canada has no oversight then on anything.
So it's a good thing.
Oh, it's massive.
We want this.
Massive solution to this entire mess and everything else. It also ensures your bodily sovereignty, that you get to make your own medical choices. You also are allowed to have access to the products, the practitioners, and the information to be able to make those informed choices. It was such a well thought through piece of what could be legislation. Okay. And if you go to the nhppa.org website, there's links to the Charter of Health Freedom, and that's on a separate website as well. But there is a petition and it's a paper petition. And let me just address the usual pushback. Why don't you make it an e-petition? Because e-petitions, we cannot, first of all, combine. This started before e-petitions were a thing. And we did check with the government regulators over petitions, and they very clearly said you cannot combine them. And the government e-petition structure is such that you only have like 4 months to get all your signatures and that sort of thing. So we already had over 100,000 signatures for this before e-petitions became a thing. So we're not going to dump those and start over.
Right.
Every paper petition signature, MPs know that these represent at least 500, maybe even 1,000 people in their riding. So they're extremely important because MPs know the challenges that exist to get those paper signatures. Okay, and so yes, it's been going on for a number of years, and strategically, it needs to be at the right time. So we still do, the process would be to still find the right MP to present this to Parliament and present it so that it could be voted on and passed as a bill. Timing is really critically important. So right now in this letter, it's one piece, but there is a link to it. And so part of the process would be to educate your MP about the Charter of Health Freedom, that this is a solution that would make all of these other things, I think, go away.
Okay, so because we're coming up to an hour and a half. I want to make sure that Sean also has time, and I want to make sure that everybody who's listening will know Melody is going to give me all these links that are really important that we're talking about here, right? Because I just want to make sure to point everyone to actionable items. So if you're still listening, you're a critical thinker and you care about what's going on, right? I just want to kind of interject there. And then I, if there's anything else, please, finish up, Melody.
Well, I was just going to say, yes, I will give you all the links to the resources so people can, look at these and do their critical thinking and understand what the implications are. But I think, people are, they're tired of all the stuff coming at them with no real great solutions. I think we do have a solution here, and we do really need people to take the time, engage your MP. Those really quick click letters like that were coming out from CHFA. By the way, the CHFA also did an e-petition. Read the fine print, you guys. Like, if you read that petition, you're not going to want to sign it. The last paragraph actually essentially agrees with the self-care framework and everything else. It's just saying, well, let's just kind of put a pause on it. It's like, no, NHPPA, Sean Buckley's, our position is that we are not negotiating. It needs to be stopped.
Yes.
All right. This is all complete nonsense. We are not negotiating. So be very clear on what letters you're signing and understand what it is you're asking your MP to do. And, participate in educating your MP. This is the test case for Canada, guys. Sean has said this a number of times in videos as well. This is the test case in Canada for being able to take our power back with our MPs, helping them, assume their appropriate roles again and represent the constituents. So it's incredibly important initiative. And I really, hope more people will participate and then, roll it out. Tell your friends, take the grassroots approach to it. Your neighbors, your friends, your community, if you're a practitioner, your clients and your patients. We can do this. We've won it before through the MPs. This is how we stopped Bill C-51 and the ones before that. It can be done. Okay. So anyway, just leave that with that high point, that level of encouragement. We can do this. Okay, but it needs to take everybody. Don't feel overwhelmed, and don't feel this is not feasible. We can do this. So.
Thank you. What about you, Brett? Any last words?
I'm good. I think that's a great note to end on.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you both so much. This has been a very valuable conversation. And of course, I know it's important. So we're going to push this out as a special release episode. So thank you so much for coming today. I appreciate both of you.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you for having us. I really appreciate your time and sharing this with your audience as well.
Okay, I press stop on the audio.